He thought the rain was the reason she was crying. But Vincent Moretti was about to learn that some storms begin long before the sky turns dark. Grace Whitaker stood beneath the narrow stone awning behind the Moretti estate, soaked from her shoulders to the hem of her black uniform, clutching a half-torn trash bag in one hand while the other stayed hidden inside the pocket of her apron. Rain hammered the marble steps, spilled from the copper gutters, and blurred the golden lights of the mansion until the whole place looked like a palace drowning in its own silence. She should have gone inside. She should have dried her face, fixed her hair, swallowed whatever pain had broken loose in her chest, and returned to being what everyone in that house expected her to be: quiet, useful, invisible. But for the first time in 6 months, Grace could not move. Her breath came in small, uneven pulls. Her dark curls clung to her cheeks. Her shoes, cheap black flats bought from a discount store on the south side, were filled with cold water. Behind her, through the tall windows, the engagement dinner continued as if nothing had happened. Crystal glasses still caught the candlelight. Wealthy guests still laughed over plates of food that cost more than Grace spent on groceries in a week. Claudia Bellamy's bright voice still floated above the music, smooth and sharp, the kind of voice that could insult a person and make it sound like etiquette. Grace stared into the rain and tried not to hear any of it. Then headlights swept across the back drive. A black Bentley rolled through the iron gates, its tires whispering over wet gravel. The driver stepped out first, opening a wide umbrella, but the man in the back seat did not move right away. Vincent Moretti sat in the darkness for one long second, watching. At 38, Vincent was the kind of man people lowered their voices around without being told. White, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like it had been carved onto him. He carried power the way other men carried keys. Nothing about him was rushed. Nothing about him was wasted. He had built an empire by reading rooms, reading lies, reading fear before it became a threat. But what he saw beneath the awning made something in his expression tighten. Grace Whitaker, his maid, was crying in the rain like the mansion had finally become too heavy for her to hold up alone. The driver lifted the umbrella, but Vincent raised one hand, stopping him. He stepped into the rain uncovered. In seconds, his expensive suit darkened at the shoulders, but he did not seem to notice. Grace heard his footsteps before she saw him, firm and slow against the wet stone. Her body went still. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand, but it was useless. The rain had already told on her. "Grace," Vincent said, his voice low enough to make the night listen. She looked up, startled that he knew her name. Most people in that house simply snapped their fingers. "Mr. Moretti," she whispered, lowering her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll clean this up. That isn't what I asked." He stopped a few feet away, his gaze moving from her trembling mouth to the apron pocket she kept pressed against her side. "What happened?" Grace's fingers tightened around the trash bag. For a second, the truth rose to her throat. The hallway, Ethan's frightened face, the broken glass, the bracelet Claudia swore had been stolen, the way every eye in that dining room had turned on Grace as if her uniform were proof of guilt. But then she remembered Ethan's small voice shaking behind the laundry room door, and she swallowed everything that could have saved her. "Please don't ask me that, sir," she said. Vincent's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the first edge of doubt. Rain slid down his jaw. The mansion behind them glowed warm and untouched, while the two of them stood in the cold, divided from the world by water and silence. He had seen men lie for money, for power, for survival. But Grace was not lying like someone hiding a crime. She was silent like someone protecting a wound that was not her own. Then the back door opened. A thin strip of yellow light fell across the steps, and 8-year-old Ethan Moretti stood barefoot in the doorway, pale, shaking, and staring straight at Grace. "Papa," the boy said, his voice breaking through the rain. "Don't let them send her away." Vincent turned slowly. Grace closed her eyes. And in that moment, the most dangerous man in Chicago understood that the woman crying outside his mansion had not been caught doing something wrong. She had been left alone after doing something right. 3 hours earlier, the Moretti estate had not looked like a place where anyone could cry. It looked like a dream built for people who had never worried about rent, never counted coins at a grocery store register, never chosen between a medical bill and a winter coat. Warm light poured from chandeliers over polished marble floors. White roses climbed the banisters in perfect spirals. Silverware rested beside bone china plates, each setting measured to the inch by Mrs. Hargrove, who had run that mansion for 12 years and believed mistakes were something poor people paid for twice. Grace Whittaker moved through it all with a tray balanced in both hands, her black uniform pressed, her hair pinned back, her face calm in the way survival teaches a woman to be calm. She had arrived at 6 that morning, cleaned the east wing, polished the library shelves, helped prepare the dining room, and changed the guest towels in 7 bathrooms before the first car pulled through the gates. By 7 in the evening, her feet ached so badly that every step felt like a secret she was keeping from the world. But Grace did not limp. She did not sigh. She did not allow her shoulders to fall. In homes like the Moretti estate, pain was only tolerated when it belonged to rich people. Everyone else was expected to carry it quietly. Across the dining room, Vincent Moretti sat at the head of the table, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable beneath the gold glow of the candles. Beside him, Claudia Bellamy glittered in champagne, silk, and diamonds, laughing with her family as if the entire room had been arranged to admire her. She was beautiful in the polished, practiced way of women who had never been forced to ask permission to exist. When Grace approached to refill her glass, Claudia did not look up at her face. She looked at the tray. "Careful, girl," she said lightly, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. "That crystal is older than you are." A few people smiled. Not enough to be called cruel. Just enough to make Grace feel the floor disappear beneath her. "Yes, ma'am," Grace said, steadying the bottle with both hands. Her voice stayed soft. Her eyes stayed lowered. That was what Mrs. Hargrove had taught her on her first day. Do not answer tone with tone. Do not make yourself memorable. Do not give powerful people a reason to notice you in anger. Grace had learned that lesson long before the Moretti mansion. She had learned it in hospital waiting rooms, where nurses spoke faster when they saw her thrift store shoes. She had learned it in job interviews, where managers praised her work ethic but offered her the hardest shifts. She had learned it in the small apartment she shared with her younger brother Malik, where the refrigerator hummed louder than the television because there was rarely enough food to make either of them comfortable. Malik was 21, bright, stubborn, and sick in a way that made every day feel borrowed. Kidney treatments had taken his college savings, then Grace's savings, then everything that could be sold without making the apartment look empty. So Grace worked. She cleaned during the day, took laundry at night when she could, and sent every spare dollar toward a hospital balance that never seemed to shrink. That was why Claudia's little insults did not matter, or at least that was what Grace told herself as she carried plates from the kitchen to the dining room. Names did not matter. Pride did not pay bills. Humiliation could be swallowed if it kept Malik alive. Then she passed the far end of the table and saw Ethan Moretti sitting alone in his chair, small in his navy blazer, staring at a plate he had not touched. No one noticed him. Not the guests. Not Claudia. Not even Vincent, who had just been called into a quiet conversation near the study doors. Ethan's dark eyes followed Grace with the silent desperation of a child who had learned not to interrupt adults. Grace paused just long enough to set a small bread roll near his hand. "You do not have to eat everything," she whispered. "Just start with something small." Ethan looked at her, then at the bread, and gave the faintest nod. It was barely a moment, barely anything at all. But Claudia saw it. Her smile thinned. "Grace," she called across the table, sweet as poisoned honey. "When you are finished pretending to be family, the powder room needs attention." The room quieted for half a breath. Grace felt the words land. Ethan's small hand curled around the bread. Vincent, at the study doorway, turned his head, and for the first time that night, he really looked at the woman everyone else had trained themselves not to see. The powder room did not need attention. Grace knew it the second she stepped inside and saw the untouched hand towels, the spotless sink, the faint scent of lemon polish still hanging in the air from the last time she had cleaned it 40 minutes earlier. Claudia had sent her away for one reason only, to remind her where she belonged. Grace stood beneath the soft wall light, staring at her reflection in the oval mirror. Her face looked composed, but her eyes gave her away. Tired, careful, holding too much. She adjusted the collar of her uniform and pressed her palms flat against the cool marble counter until the heat in her chest settled. She would finish the dinner. She would walk past Claudia with her head level. She would go home before midnight, Check Malik's pill organizer. Reheat whatever soup was left in the refrigerator and pretend the ache in her feet was not crawling up her legs. That was the plan. Then she heard it. A sound so small most people would have missed it beneath the music from the dining room. Glass touching stone. Not breaking, not crashing, just a faint, wrong click from the west corridor. Grace lifted her head. The west corridor led past the private gallery, through the old service arch, and down toward the wine cellar. Staff were not allowed there during family events. Guests were not supposed to know it existed. Grace opened the powder room door slowly. The hallway outside was dimmer than the main wing, lit by bronze sconces that painted the walls in long amber shadows. At the far end, she saw Ethan. He was standing near the cellar stairs, one hand on the railing, his little shoulders stiff under his navy blazer. "Ethan," Grace whispered. He turned just enough for her to see his face. Pale, confused, scared in a way children become when they have seen something they cannot explain. Grace forgot Claudia, forgot the rules, forgot the invisible line between a maid and a Moretti child. She set the folded towel in her hand onto a side table and moved toward him, quiet but quick. "Sweetheart, what are you doing down here?" Ethan did not answer. He pointed toward the cellar door. It was open, only a few inches, but enough for a cold breath of air to slip into the corridor. Grace felt the hairs rise along her arms. From inside came another sound. A drawer sliding shut. A low murmur. Not Vincent's voice. Not any of the staff. Grace placed herself between Ethan and the door before she even thought about it. "Go back to the dining room," she whispered. Ethan shook his head hard. "There is a man." The words were barely air. Grace's mouth went dry. In the dining room, laughter rose and fell like nothing in the world was wrong. Vincent was still speaking with someone near the study. Claudia was still shining beneath chandeliers. No one was watching the boy. No one except Grace. She crouched in front of Ethan, lowering her voice to the same calm tone she used when Malik woke from hospital nightmares. "Listen to me very carefully. You are going to walk to the laundry room right there, and you are going to close the door. You are not in trouble. I am right behind you." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "But you are scared." Grace gave him the smallest smile she could manage. Grown-ups can be scared and still do the right thing. That seemed to reach him. He moved quickly, bare fear making his dress, shoes nearly silent on the runner rug. Grace guided him into the laundry room, turned the lock gently, and leaned close to the door. "Do not open this until your father says your name. Only your father. Do you understand?" "Yes," Ethan whispered from the other side. Grace turned back toward the cellar. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to shake the corridor. The door opened wider. A man stepped out carrying a small leather case from Vincent's private storage shelf. He stopped when he saw Grace. For 1 second, neither of them moved. Then his eyes dropped to her uniform, and something like relief crossed his face, as if a maid was not a person who could ruin anything important. Grace lifted her chin. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "You need to leave." The man smiled without warmth and took 1 step forward. Grace did not move back. Behind her, Ethan made a tiny sound from inside the laundry room. That was all it took. Grace reached for the silver serving bell on the hallway table and struck it hard against the wall. The sharp ringing tore through the corridor, bright and impossible to ignore. The man flinched, startled, then turned and rushed toward the rear service exit, disappearing into the rain-darkened garden. Grace stood frozen, the bell still in her hand, the open cellar behind her, the locked laundry room beside her, and the sound of approaching footsteps finally rising from the distant dining room. She had broken every rule in the mansion, and she knew, before anyone arrived, that people like Claudia would make sure Grace paid for being the first one brave enough to notice danger. The ringing bell had barely faded before the west corridor filled with footsteps, voices, and the sudden panic of people who had spent the evening pretending nothing could touch them. Mrs. Hargrove arrived first, breathless, one hand pressed to her pearl necklace as her eyes moved from the open cellar door to Grace standing beside the laundry room. 2 security men followed, their polished shoes skidding slightly on the runner rug. Then came Claudia, wrapped in perfume and indignation, her diamond earrings flashing beneath the hallway lights. "What on earth is going on?" she demanded. But her gaze found Grace before it found the cellar. That was how Claudia saw the world. Trouble always had a uniform. Grace lowered the silver bell to the side table with careful hands. "There was someone in the cellar," she said. Ethan saw him. I locked Ethan in the laundry room to keep him safe. For one blessed second, Mrs. Hargrove looked frightened enough to believe her. Then Claudia stepped forward. Someone in the cellar? She repeated, her voice rising just enough to draw more guests into the corridor. How convenient. Grace turned toward her. Ma'am, you were sent to clean the powder room. Instead, you were found near Mr. Moretti's private cellar, holding a serving bell, with my future stepson locked behind a door. Claudia let the sentence hang in the air like evidence. Behind the laundry room door, Ethan knocked once, small and uncertain. Grace moved instinctively toward him, but one of the security men lifted a hand to stop her. Not roughly, not cruelly, but enough to remind everyone she was not family. Grace froze. Please, she said, keeping her voice low. He is scared. Let me talk to him until his father gets here. Claudia laughed softly. Listen to that. Suddenly she speaks as if she is his mother. The words struck harder than they should have. Grace looked down, swallowing the ache before it reached her face. From the dining room, more guests gathered at the archway, their whispers folding over one another. A missing item was mentioned. Claudia's bracelet. The narrow diamond bracelet she had been showing off all night. The one her mother claimed had belonged to a great-aunt in Boston. Claudia touched her bare wrist with theatrical surprise, then turned her eyes back to Grace. Search her apron. Mrs. Hargrove stiffened. Miss Bellamy, perhaps we should wait for Mr. Moretti. Search her apron, Claudia said again, colder this time. Grace felt the room tilt. I did not take anything. It was the first time that night her voice carried. Claudia's smile sharpened. Then you will not mind proving it. The security man looked uncomfortable, but the pressure of Claudia's name, her money, and her place beside Vincent made him obey. Grace slowly untied her apron with fingers that had begun to tremble. She placed it on the side table herself, because even in humiliation, she refused to be handled like something dirty. Mrs. Hargrove opened the front pocket. A cleaning cloth. A receipt from the bus station. A small packet of pain medicine for Malik that Grace had forgotten to leave in her locker. Then her hand paused. The hallway became quiet in that awful way rooms become quiet when people are waiting to be entertained by someone else's downfall. Mrs. Hargrove drew out the diamond bracelet. Light caught every stone. Claudia gasped as if the discovery hurt her. Grace stared at it, unable to breathe. That is not mine, she whispered. I have never seen that in my life. Of course not, Claudia said. Things like this usually disappear before they are seen again. Behind the laundry room door, Ethan cried out, She helped me. But his voice was thin, tangled with fear, easy for adults to ignore when they had already chosen the story they liked better. Grace stepped closer to the door, tears burning now. Ethan, breathe with me. In slowly. That is it. Out slowly. The guests stared. Claudia stared. Mrs. Hargrove stared. Even accused, even cornered, even with a diamond bracelet lying against her name like a sentence, Grace was not defending herself first. She was calming the child who had been forgotten by everyone else. Then Vincent Moretti appeared at the end of the corridor. He had not run. Men like Vincent did not need to run. The crowd parted before him anyway. His eyes moved once over the open cellar, the bracelet, Claudia's face, Grace's wet lashes, and finally the locked laundry room door. Open it, he said. The security man obeyed. Ethan rushed out and wrapped both arms around Grace's waist before anyone could stop him. Vincent watched his son cling to the maid accused of stealing from his future wife. And the hallway went silent. Vincent did not look at Claudia first. That was what made the silence dangerous. He looked at Ethan, whose small hands were twisted into the wet fabric of Grace's apron, as if letting go would make the whole world fall apart. The boy's face was pale, his breathing uneven, his eyes fixed on the floor in the way children look when adults have made fear too large for words. Grace stood perfectly still, afraid that any movement might make the room misunderstand her again. She wanted to kneel, to tell Ethan he was safe, to wipe the tears from his cheeks, but the diamond bracelet on the side table seemed to glow brighter than the chandeliers, accusing her without a voice. Vincent stepped closer. Ethan, he said, and the sharpness left his tone. Look at me. The boy shook his head and pressed closer to Grace. She did not take it. Claudia exhaled, wounded and impatient. Sweetheart, you are upset. You do not know what you saw. Ethan's fingers tightened. Grace felt it through the apron. Vincent's eyes moved to Claudia then, only for a second, but it was enough to drain the color from her smile. "Do not speak for my son." No one moved. Rain tapped against the tall windows at the end of the corridor, soft and steady, like a clock counting down. Claudia recovered quickly, placing one hand over her bare wrist. "Vincent, I understand this is uncomfortable, but the bracelet was found in her apron. In any normal household, this would already be settled." "This is not a normal household," Vincent said. His voice was quiet. That made it worse. Grace finally found her own voice. "Mr. Moretti, I did not take anything. But Ethan should not be standing here while everyone talks about him." It was not the answer anyone expected. She did not beg. She did not point at Claudia. She did not ask Vincent to believe her. She asked him to protect his child from the room. Something shifted behind his eyes. He had heard many people plead for themselves. He had rarely heard someone plead for another person while their own name was being dragged across the floor. Vincent crouched in front of Ethan, lowering himself until he was no longer towering over the boy. "Did Grace tell you to hide in the laundry room?" Ethan nodded. "Why?" The boy's lips trembled. "Because there was a man near the cellar." A murmur moved through the guests. Claudia's posture stiffened. "A man?" Vincent asked. Ethan nodded again, tears spilling now. "I was looking for you. I heard something. Then I saw him. Grace put me behind her." Grace closed her eyes. She had hoped he would not have to say it. Claudia stepped in quickly, or she told him that afterward. Children repeat what adults tell them, Vincent, especially when they are frightened. Grace's head lifted. For the first time that night, something stronger than fear crossed her face. Not anger, not defiance, a kind of tired disbelief. "I have never asked him to lie." "You had my bracelet in your apron," Claudia snapped, her sweetness finally cracking. Ethan flinched. Grace instantly placed one hand on the boy's shoulder, not possessive, not dramatic, just steady. "Breathe," she whispered. "In slowly. Out slowly." Ethan obeyed. Vincent watched it happen. He watched his son respond to the maid's voice faster than he had responded to doctors, tutors, nannies, even to him on the worst nights after his mother died. Around them, the guests seemed to disappear. The diamonds, the champagne, the old money smiles, all of it became background noise. There was only Ethan breathing, Grace steadying him, and Claudia waiting for power to do what it had always done for her. Vincent stood. "Take Ethan upstairs," he said to Mrs. Hargrove. Ethan grabbed Grace harder. No, the word was small, but absolute. Vincent looked at Grace. "Will he go with you?" Grace hesitated. She understood the trap inside the kindness. If she moved with Ethan, people would say she was manipulating him. If she refused, the boy would crumble in front of strangers. She met Vincent's eyes for the first time that evening. "Only if you want me to, sir." The respect in the answer was not submission. It was a boundary. Vincent recognized it, and something in his face changed. "I do." Grace nodded, then bent slightly toward Ethan. "Come on, sweetheart. Just upstairs. Your father is right here." Ethan allowed her to guide him away, still holding her hand. As they passed the guests, Claudia's mother whispered something about staff forgetting their place. Vincent heard it. Everyone knew he heard it. But he said nothing yet. He only watched Grace disappear up the staircase with his son, then turned toward the side table where the bracelet lay. He picked it up with 2 fingers, not like a stolen treasure, but like a planted question. Then he looked toward the open cellar door. "Lock the exits," he said, "and bring me the security footage." Upstairs, Ethan's bedroom was quiet in a way the dining room had never been. The walls were painted a soft blue, the shelves lined with model trains, baseball cards, and framed photographs of a smiling woman Grace had only seen in pictures. Ethan's mother. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood, laundry soap, and the rain drifting through the cracked window near the reading chair. Grace guided Ethan to the edge of his bed and sat on the rug in front of him, keeping herself lower than he was, giving him space to breathe. "You are safe now," she said gently. "Your father is downstairs. Mrs. Hargrove is right outside the door. Nobody is upset with you." Ethan looked at the floor. "They are upset with you." Grace's throat tightened, but she smiled anyway. It was a small smile, the kind people give children when the truth is too heavy to hand over all at once. Grown-ups get confused sometimes. Ethan shook his head. "Claudia does not like you." Grace folded her hands in her lap, careful not to show how much those words landed. Children had a way of saying what everyone else dressed up in manners. "Miss Bellamy has a lot on her mind tonight. She called you girl." The room went still around them. Grace looked toward the rain-streaked window, where the mansion lights trembled in the glass. For 1 second, she was not in a billionaire's house. She was back at the bus stop after a double shift, back in a hospital hallway with Malik asleep under a thin blanket, back in every place where people had looked past her until they needed something cleaned, carried, fixed, or forgiven. Some people use small words, Grace said quietly, because they are afraid of seeing a whole person. Ethan thought about that. His breathing had slowed, but his fingers still twisted the edge of his blanket. Were you scared? He asked. Grace could have lied. Adults lied to children all the time and called it protection. But Ethan had seen too much tonight for soft lies. Yes, she said. I was scared. His eyes lifted. Then why did you stand there? Grace leaned closer, her voice barely above the rain. Because you were more scared than I was. Ethan's face crumpled, and he reached for her hand. Grace let him hold it. Downstairs, the mansion had begun to change its sound. The laughter was gone. Doors closed. Low voices moved through the halls. The staff knew that when Vincent Moretti became quiet, the house itself should become quiet with him. Grace could feel the investigation beginning beneath her feet like distant thunder. She should have felt relief. Instead, dread settled in her stomach. Security cameras might show the stranger. They might show Ethan. They might show Grace doing exactly what she said she had done. But they would also show the one thing she feared most. Ethan's terror, exposed and replayed in front of adults who treated pain like evidence. Mrs. Hargrove opened the bedroom door a few inches. Grace, she said softly, and the softness frightened Grace more than anger would have. Mr. Moretti wants you downstairs. Ethan grabbed her hand tighter. No, Grace squeezed his fingers once. I will be all right. Promise. She hesitated. In her life, promises had always been expensive. I promise I will try. She stood and smoothed the front of her uniform, though it was still wrinkled from the night's chaos. At the doorway, Mrs. Hargrove's eyes dropped to the bracelet-shaped accusation still hanging in the air between them. I am sorry, the older woman whispered. Grace did not answer, because an apology spoken in a hallway could not undo silence spoken in a crowd. She walked back downstairs alone. The grand staircase curved beneath her feet, each step carrying her closer to the room where wealthy guests waited to see whether the maid would be dismissed, forgiven, or destroyed. At the bottom, Claudia stood with her arms folded, dry-eyed and perfect. Vincent was near the study doors, watching Grace descend. His expression revealed nothing. But the moment Grace reached the last step, he saw the way she looked toward Ethan's hallway before she looked at her own fate. That was when he understood. Grace was not afraid of losing her job anymore. She was afraid his son would lose his peace. Vincent did not bring Grace into the dining room. He brought everyone else into the study. That choice alone unsettled the guests more than any raised voice could have. The study was Vincent Moretti's private ground, a room of dark walnut shelves, leather chairs, city maps, and floor-to-ceiling windows where rain slid down the glass in silver lines. Men who entered that room usually left with less confidence than they carried in. Tonight, Claudia stood near the fireplace with her parents beside her, chin lifted, diamonds bright, trying to look offended instead of afraid. Grace remained near the door, hands folded in front of her, still damp from the rain, still wearing the uniform everyone had used to decide her value before hearing her truth. Vincent crossed to the desk without removing his jacket. He took off his watch, placed it beside the keyboard, and looked at his head of security. West Corridor, 7:35 to 7:50. The man nodded and connected the security feed to the large screen hidden behind the bookcase panel. No one spoke while the image flickered to life. At first, the hallway appeared empty, warm with soft amber light. Then Ethan entered the frame, small and alone, moving toward the cellar stairs with the uncertain steps of a child searching for his father. Grace felt her breath catch. She wanted to look away, not because she feared being proven wrong, but because seeing Ethan frightened all over again felt like asking a child to suffer twice for adult understanding. Vincent noticed. His eyes moved to her face, then back to the screen. The video showed the cellar door already open. A shadow shifted inside. Ethan stopped. Even without sound, everyone could see the moment fear found him. His shoulders rose. His hand gripped the railing. Then Grace appeared from the powder room corridor. She did not hesitate. She moved straight to him, lowered herself, spoke to him, guided him away from the open door, and placed her body between the boy and whatever waited inside. The room lost its air. Claudia's father looked down. Mrs. Hargrove pressed one hand against her mouth. The footage continued. Grace moved Ethan to the laundry room, waited until he was safely inside, then turned back. The cellar door opened wider. A man stepped into view with a leather case in his hand. His face was angled away from the camera, but his purpose was clear enough to silence every whisper. Grace lifted her chin at him. Even on a silent screen, her courage had a sound. Then came the moment with the serving bell. The bright flash of motion. The man startled. The escape through the rear service exit. The rain swallowing him into the garden. Vincent's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Pause. The image froze on Grace, standing alone in the corridor, one hand still raised, the other already reaching toward the laundry room door where Ethan had hidden. Vincent turned slowly toward Claudia. You said she frightened him. Claudia swallowed. That footage does not explain the bracelet. No, Vincent said. It does not. He looked back to security. Continue. The video jumped forward. People entered the corridor. Mrs. Hargrove. Security. Claudia. Then the room watched Claudia step close to the side table while everyone else looked toward the cellar. Her hand moved with practiced ease, small enough that a careless person might miss it. But Vincent Moretti had not survived by being careless. On the screen, Claudia slipped the bracelet into Grace's apron pocket while Grace was turned toward the laundry room door, whispering to Ethan through the wood. The study went silent in a way silence had never been silent before. It was not empty. It was full of judgment. Grace stared at the screen, not with triumph, but with exhaustion. The kind that comes when the truth finally arrives too late to spare you the wound. Claudia's mother whispered her daughter's name, but Claudia did not answer. Vincent picked up the diamond bracelet from his desk and held it under the lamp. The stones threw little pieces of light across his hand. You planted this, he said. Claudia's face hardened, but her eyes had already betrayed her. Vincent, you are embarrassing me in front of everyone. He looked at her then, fully, coldly, as if seeing her for the first time without candlelight to soften the view. No, he said. You did that yourself. Claudia's face changed in small, expensive ways. First disbelief, then insult, then calculation. She looked at Vincent as if the room, the evidence, even Grace herself were inconveniences that could still be rearranged if she found the right tone. You are choosing a maid's story over mine, she said, soft enough to sound wounded, sharp enough to cut. Vincent did not move. I am choosing what I saw. The words landed harder than anger. Claudia's father cleared his throat from beside the fireplace, his confidence weakened by the frozen image still glowing on the screen. Vincent, perhaps this should be handled privately. Families have misunderstandings. Vincent turned his head slightly. This is not a family misunderstanding. His gaze returned to Claudia. This is a woman humiliating an employee, frightening my son, and lying in my home while wearing my ring. The last word made Claudia's hand twitch toward the diamond on her finger. Grace stood near the door, feeling the attention of the room shift toward her in a way that did not feel like respect yet. It felt like exposure. She had spent her life learning how to survive by not being looked at too closely, and now every polished face in Vincent Moretti's study was staring at her wet uniform, her tired eyes, her trembling hands, as if the truth had turned her from furniture into a person all at once. She wished she felt victorious. She did not. She felt cold. She felt embarrassed. She felt the ache of every second she had stood there while people decided she was guilty because the lies sounded more comfortable than her innocence. Vincent saw her arms cross slightly against the chill. Without looking away from Claudia, he said, Mrs. Hargrove, bring Miss Whitaker a coat. Miss Whitaker, not Grace, not the girl, not the maid. The formality moved through the room like a match struck in darkness. Mrs. Hargrove hurried to the hall closet and returned with a wool coat, placing it gently around Grace's shoulders. Grace whispered, "Thank you," but her voice almost disappeared. Claudia laughed once, a small desperate sound. "This is absurd. She works here, Vincent. You are making a scene over staff." That was the moment something in the room broke beyond repair. Vincent stepped closer to Claudia, not threatening, not loud, simply close enough that she had to meet the consequence of her own words. "She protected my son while you protected your image." Claudia's eyes flashed. "You cannot be serious." Vincent looked at the ring on her hand. Give it back. No one breathed. The rain tapped the windows. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, and Grace thought of Ethan waiting, probably sitting on the edge of his bed, wondering whether adults had finally told the truth. Claudia stared at Vincent, then at her parents, then at the guests who had smiled at her cruelty less than an hour earlier and were now studying the carpet. Slowly, with a face gone pale beneath perfect makeup, she pulled off the engagement ring and placed it on the desk. It made the smallest sound, barely more than a click against polished wood, but Grace felt it in her chest. Vincent did not look at the ring. The wedding is over. Claudia's mother gasped. Her father said Vincent's name, but Vincent raised one hand, and the man stopped. There was no shouting, no spectacle, just an ending delivered with the calm precision of a door closing forever. Claudia's eyes filled, but the tears did not soften what everyone had already seen. She reached for dignity too late, gathering her purse, lifting her chin, pretending to leave by choice. At the doorway, she paused beside Grace. For one dangerous second, it looked as if she might speak. Vincent's voice cut through the space between them. Do not. Claudia walked out without another word. One by one, her parents followed, then the guests, their silk dresses and tailored jackets moving through the hallway with none of the ease they had arrived with. When the study emptied, Grace remained by the door, wrapped in a coat that did not belong to her, unable to decide whether she was allowed to breathe. Vincent picked up the bracelet and placed it beside the ring. Two bright objects, both suddenly worthless. Then he looked at Grace. For the first time all night, there was no command in his voice. Miss Whitaker, he said, I owe you an apology in front of every person who doubted you. Grace blinked, and the room blurred. She had expected payment, dismissal, silence, anything but humility from a man everyone feared. Vincent opened the study door and looked toward the hall where the last guests had stopped pretending not to listen. Come back, he said. All of you. And the mansion, which had spent the night looking down on Grace Whitaker, slowly turned around to face her. The guests returned slowly, not because they wanted to, but because Vincent Moretti had asked only once. They gathered in the hall outside the study, stripped of their laughter, their champagne ease, their easy judgment. Grace stood near the open door with Mrs. Hargrove's coat around her shoulders, feeling the weight of every stare. Only this time, the stares were different. Less certain, less hungry. Some were ashamed. Some were simply afraid to be seen on the wrong side of the truth. Vincent walked to the center of the hall and waited until no one whispered. The rain had softened beyond the windows, becoming a steady hush against the glass, as if even the storm had leaned closer to listen. Earlier tonight, he said, his voice calm enough to make every word unavoidable. Grace Whitaker was accused in my home. She was insulted in my home. She was made to stand before people who had already decided what kind of woman she was because of the work she does. Grace's throat tightened. She looked down, but Vincent's next words made her lift her eyes. That was wrong. The sentence was simple. No decoration. No excuse. And somehow that made it heavier than any apology she had ever received. Vincent turned toward her fully. He did not speak over his shoulder. He did not offer a quick nod meant to dismiss discomfort. He faced her the way men in his world faced equals when pride was too small to matter. Miss Whitaker, you protected my son when no one else was watching. You told the truth when it would have been easier to protect yourself first. And when this house treated you without dignity, you still gave dignity to a frightened child. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs in his robe, Mrs. Hargrove's assistant beside him. He should have been asleep, but some moments called children back to the places adults failed them. His small hand rested on the railing. Vincent saw him and did not send him away. Grace saw him too, and the last wall inside her almost broke. Vincent continued, softer now, but not weaker. I apologize to you. Publicly. Completely. And I will make this right. The hall remained silent. No one clapped. No one needed to. Applause would have cheapened what the room was finally learning. Grace swallowed, her voice barely steady. Thank you, Mr. Moretti. Vincent shook his head once. Vincent. The name hung there. Not romantic, not familiar, but human. A door opening where a wall had been. Then he turned to his staff. Miss Whitaker's position changes tonight. She will no longer answer to guests. She will no longer be spoken to as if respect is optional. Starting tomorrow, she will oversee Ethan's care schedule and receive full benefits, private transportation, and whatever time she needs for her family. Grace's breath caught at the word family. Vincent noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like him noticed everything. But tonight he was finally noticing the right things. Your brother's treatment, he said quietly, will be handled through the Moretti Medical Foundation. No favors. No debt. A correction. Grace closed her eyes for 1 second. In that darkness, she saw Malik's hospital room, the unpaid envelopes on their kitchen table, the late buses, the cold mornings, the years she had spent trying not to collapse because someone needed her standing. When she opened her eyes, tears were there, but they did not lower her. Ethan came down the stairs and walked straight to her. This time, no one stopped him. He slipped his hand into hers, small and warm. Grace looked at Vincent, then at the hallway full of people who had finally run out of reasons to look past her. She did not smile much. She did not need to. She simply stood taller. Outside, the rain slowed to a mist over the marble steps where she had cried alone less than an hour before. Inside, the mansion felt different, not kinder yet, but changed. And that night, beneath the last whisper of the storm, Vincent Moretti learned that dignity does not ask for permission to stand tall.